Welcome to another episode of Business Talk Library on RETV. Today we're going to be talking about how to resolve conflict when it comes to business in a respectful and effective manner. Stay tuned. Hello. I am Lola Turner, and this is my amazing husband, Terrell Turner. Welcome to another episode of the Business Talk Library on RETV. We have a great episode for you today, and we're excited to jump into it. So today we're going to be talking about conflict resolution. I personally brought this topic up because I think we're in a society today where sometimes, you guys disagree on stuff and you just cancel each other out. But what happens when you are in business together and you guys have a relationship? For us, if you're married and in business together, whatever the case may be, is how do you go through the process of resolving the conflict and the disagreements that you may have in business? How do you navigate that? And how do you come to a place where you guys can move forward and still have a healthy relationship? So I'm excited to dive into that. So any initial thoughts, Terrell?
Well, one thing I probably would say on that is sometimes you really don't want to have a healthy relationship after it.
All right. Okay.
You just want to all right. So because I think sometimes I do think, and part of that maybe is because lately I've been doing a lot of work with lawyers and working with a lot of family attorneys. And so pretty much they're just constantly doing divorces. Mm-hmm. And one of the big things that they ran into, I was talking to one lawyer and saying that had a client that, owned several businesses, and he and his wife were getting divorced. And some people would say, how do you get divorced and still own the business? It's like what they really wanted. And then definitely what he wanted was he just wanted to be her to be done with it. I don't want us to have a healthy business relationship. I want you out. I don't want to continue the relationship. So I think sometimes I do think sometimes when we think about conflict resolution, it's just hey, how do we resolve this so we can still work together? Yeah. And sometimes I think the resolution is how do we wrap this up?
Yeah.
You go your way, I'll go my way.
That's true. So yeah, that's a valid point. So in all honesty, I don't think you can always resolve things to the point where it just is good and dandy and you guys are best friends and you're together forever as business partners. But in some cases, that's not how it always works. Sometimes you can resolve it. Sometimes that's the best way going forward. And other times it's not. So that's a valid point. I acknowledge and I agree to that. So I guess let's just even start with the concept of conflict. I think when people think about conflict, I typically have seen, I think one of the things that I had to learn when we got married is I think people think that when you have conflict with your business partner and, when you have conflict with your business partner, conflict just means there's a problem. This doesn't work. There's an issue. I remember when Terrell and I had our first argument as a dating couple, you just oh my gosh, this relationship is just, I don't even remember. Was it even an argument? I don't even remember. Anyways, the point is, the first point I want to make is that just because there's conflict doesn't necessarily mean that there's a problem. Sometimes the beginning of conflict is a red flag and it is a highlight that, there is a problem or a potential problem here. But I think conflict oftentimes just starts with a difference in opinion. Mm-hmm. How you want to handle it and how I want to handle it are two different situations. In some cases, one person may kind of take the initiative and be like, well, we're doing it the way that I want to do it. And then it just becomes a disagreement. But I think that's one of the things, I guess, is just, hey, just because you're disagreeing with someone doesn't always necessarily mean that there's a problem. Sometimes it's just there's miscommunication of how you guys initially agreed to handle things and, or just miscommunication period between both parties.
No, I think that's a good point because, when it comes down to, like you said, with conflict, I do think sometimes the source of the conflict may just be there wasn't enough clarity in the beginning.
Yep.
Two people decide to go into business. Hey, this person has, or I guess it's you're saying words that you assume the other person understands. Yep. Hey, we're going to be a top-notch accounting firm. Mm-hmm. And I hear people say that all the time, hey, we're a top-notch this, we're a top-notch that. Mm-hmm. Well, it's that could mean something different. One person could assume that to mean oh, we're a top-notch, meaning we're the highest price.
Yep.
And another person could be like, no, like we go above and beyond to deliver for our clients.
Yeah.
And if you have those two, like if you never have that clarity, the conflict is going to come in where it's like this person is trying to do the best that they can with what they thought they understood.
Agreed.
This person's trying to do the best they can what they thought they understood. Now, when the strategies start competing with one another, there's a little bit of conflict there. And part of it is like, hey, how do we, get back on the same page, or how do we get clarity?
Agreed. And I think, this is why people talk about when people make comments about not going into business with your family, that comment. I think the reason why people make that comment is because oftentimes when you are having a conversation about what the expectations are, a lot of people don't want to hurt their family members' feelings, or they're kind of evasive or vague about, hey, what this means, what does success look like, what are our goals? Like, oh, we're just going to do this business. But if you're not clear initially and you make sure that each person understands what the expectations are ahead of time, it creates room for misunderstanding. And I think about that even in the beginning of our business is just Terrell was very clear about like, hey, this is what it's going to be. This is what it is. And so I think coming from a different background culturally, like there's words that mean certain things to me, that mean different things to Terrell. And so I think it was important for us to just also clarify and understand that. So I would say the first thing is also setting expectations, is understanding the source of the conflict. But then, like you said, a lot of the reason why there's conflict is because expectations aren't set. So I would say it's important to
I do want to talk about that, because I think that's a good
setting
point.
Expectations.
No, I mean, it's just like, I personally think, and anybody can argue with me on this, but I'm of the opinion that people suck at giving explanations and following what's being said. Because I think a lot of times, like, people are very poor. They're very poor communicators of getting their point across. Because in my opinion, I think people, when it comes down to communicating, I think over time we get lazy about communication. And like when I'm sharing a message, we just get very comfortable at, like, when you hear people say things like, you know what I mean? Like, no, I don't know what you mean. So actually explain it. Right. And because I mean, I think even like between you and I, like when you and I have conversation, whereas there are times you get upset with me because you'll say something, I'm like, oh, what do you mean by that? Well, why you gotta be difficult? I'm just like,
why you gotta make things complicated? I said what I said.
I was like,
come to find out, I meant something different from what I said. Look at that.
And I think that that's something that, like, as a natural human thing, I think sometimes that people overestimate how clear they really are when they're communicating. It's just like they presume, because I think people don't realize that when you're talking, you have a picture in your head and you can reference the picture. So to you, it's clear because you can see the picture in your head.
Right.
The problem is the other person can't see the picture. And that other person kind of like, they may walk away with a completely different image. I mean, because I think I've heard it. I was at a conference once and, I heard this example about like the peanut butter and jelly sandwich, to where it's just like, all right, you have a person, let's say, I'm going to be the chef. I'm the one that's making the sandwich. You have a group of people sit down and it's like, all right, how do you make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich? And the people just start talking. It's like, whatever you say, that's exactly what I'm going to do. And what you ended up with is, and it's even better if you just have people write down, you have people tell you. And what ended up happening is some people ended up with a plate with just a glob of peanut butter spread over the plate because they didn't mention, hey, grab the bread.
Yeah.
And then some people ended up where they said, hey, you grab a slice of bread, you put peanut butter on it. So the person just put a blob of peanut butter in the middle and then handed it to them like, oh no, you got to spread it. Well, you didn't say that.
Right.
And I think it's just this exercise that like people are not used to having to actually explain something. It's almost like they assume the other person knows what they mean. And I've come to the opinion of, it's like when you're communicating with another person, like assume they don't know anything about the background context. You fill in the context so that way you run the best chance of walking away with both of you guys on the same page.
That's really good.
Now, on the other hand, I do think people also get lazy about listening.
This is also true. Yes, man.
Where people hear what they want to hear, and then they're like, oh, okay, yeah, I got you, I understood.
I understand.
And one of the things I started doing was, I'm like, okay, all right, what did you understand of what I said?
Explain it back to me.
And then when they try, they're like, well, you know what you mean. Like, yeah, I know what I mean. I'm trying to see if you know what I mean.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think at the core of conflict is a misunderstanding. And if you are not listening effectively, then it's hard for you to truly understand what the other person is trying to communicate, which is why I think a good way, and this is something that we don't always do, but I think this is a good idea, is like you said, is having the person repeat back to you what they understood from the conversation. You know, if you feel like, hey, this is what you heard, it never hurts to ask the person to repeat back. Like, all right, I said, this is what I said. Do you understand what I said? All right, what did I say? And I remember when Terrell used to ask me that question, I used to get annoyed. I'm like, what the heck? Like, you just said what you said. Like, why are you asking me? But really, it was very helpful because it helped me process what you had said. And I would recap it. And oftentimes the way that I would recap it was my own understanding of what had been said. And oftentimes, you know, there will be sometimes some things that I had said and I understood that Terrell necessarily didn't mean to say, or he didn't say, or I took it a different way. So I think that definitely helps with the conflict. And I think also, you know, really when, like you said, the listening aspect of, all right, this is what you said to me. This is how I understood it. And then the person takes it, instead of getting frustrated, even if they feel like the point's not being made across, it's just, okay, let's continue to go back and forth on that process until I truly feel like you understand what I'm saying. And until you truly feel like you're being understood and you're being heard.
Yeah. I mean,
but yeah,
I think there's a clear example, because one of the places that we see that habit, it's like it's ingrained in the process so much to the point that we almost don't even notice that it's happening. But that's exactly the built into the process just about every fast food place you've gone to in the drive-thru. Every good one,
that's true,
is where you place your order and then they say, so you wanted this, and this, is that correct? Then you say, yes, that is correct. You move forward. Now, I've gone to restaurants where they don't do that. You get to the window.
And I don't even see you taking notes at the restaurant. Oh my gosh. I'm like, this is what my order is. I usually always get nervous when I hear people taking, when servers are taking my orders and they don't have the paper. I'm like, hey, I want this, and this. I don't want this in it or whatever. And they're just like, okay. I'm like, if you mess up my order, because I have no indication that you have actually understood what I've said. Unless sometimes some people are good about repeating it back to you. But no, I agree. I think that's a perfect example, is this is what you ordered. I'm repeating it back to you. This is what you're getting to make sure I understand. Sometimes there's things that need to be tweaked. If, you know, you can go back and say, okay, that's not correct. This is what needs to be modified. And I think that definitely helps. But yeah, no, that's a really good point.
Because I mean, I think when you're in business, especially like when conflict arises between like you and your clients, a lot of times, you know, those conflicts are misunderstandings. And even one of the things I've learned with working with a lot of lawyers is the reason why you end up seeing a lot of, like, the reason why people sue is because their feelings were hurt and there was misunderstanding. Like, they thought they were going to get this, they got this. But when the terms are very clear, what I've seen is that the level of legal disputes drastically drop when the terms are clear, because they knew what to expect. You knew what to expect. This person lived up to their agreement. This person lived up to their agreement. We just don't get along. So we will peaceably end this. But it's just when there's misunderstanding, that's when, you know what, tensions flare. And if it gets too bad, people want to lay hands on other people. And it's just like,
dang.
Yes.
Wow, that's
I will say spending time with lawyers has really helped me like increase like a lot of the stuff we see on television where you're like, oh my gosh, that was so dramatic.
I know.
Like, nah, some of that, like this past weekend, like I was talking with a lawyer and she was just like, you know, part of the reason she loved family laws, because she was like, you know, it's just, you know, sometimes it's the stories. Like if you do another type of law, you won't hear the story where it's just like, hey, I need to file a motion because, you know, my ex or my wife that I'm separated with, she went to a witch doctor and she got a hex. So I need a motion to have her reverse that hex. So it's just like, how do you file a motion for that?
Oh my gosh, that is crazy.
And that was an actual phone call that someone made to their lawyer.
Oh, wow.
So it's just like, I need the court to force her to overturn this hex she put on me.
Oh my gosh. That is oh wow. That is, yeah. I have so many comments for that, but this is not the episode, and this is not the show, and this is not the platform for that. So we're going to move on. But absolutely, I think just like having that clear understanding is extremely important. I think the other thing that I want to well, before we move on, is there anything else you wanted to say about that before we move on?
I do think, I do think also is that the clarity and understanding, what I think what it does is it also helps you manage your business better.
Agreed.
Because when there's clear understanding, like especially I always tell people when it comes down to your customers. And I know I was talking with another lawyer client of ours, and they were like, one of the biggest issues they get into when it comes down to business relationship is someone said, "Oh, we did this deal over a handshake." No. Get it in writing. Like, even if you got to write it down on a piece of paper, or you need to just send them an email. You don't want to go to you don't have the formal process. You just want to send them an email. Hey, we met. This is what we talked about. And even like when I meet with clients, like a lot of times, like after the meeting, I'll say, okay, all right, hey, here's the things we talked about. Here's what I'm going to do. Here's what I need you to deliver. Or before we end the call, I make sure like, hey, it is very clear. This is the takeaway. This is what I'm going to do. This is what I need you to do. And then, hey, we'll meet again. That way people walk away with clarity, because I do think the more clear you can make it, also the easier it is to get your customers to pay you.
Agreed.
Because when you're clear about what the expectations are, and then you deliver to those expectations, when you ask for payment, if it's a good customer, they're going to be like, well, you did what you said you were going to do.
Exactly.
Here's the money you're asking me for.
Exactly. It level sets expectations, right? Because everybody knows what's expected, and it removes the temptation. Actually, it doesn't. It removes the excuse, or removes the tendency or the potential of any emotions getting involved. Because even if you get your emotions involved and you're like, I don't know, I feel some type of way, this happened. Well, what did we agree to? This is what we agreed to. This is what we put on paper. So you might not like the terms of the agreement, but the terms of the agreement are the terms of the agreement, and you agree to them. So I think it definitely protects both parties from being in your feelings, or protects both parties from acting on their feelings. Maybe that's the right word. And then the second thing is it level sets expectations. So if you were to get fired today from your job, you know exactly why you're getting fired. You know exactly, for example, if they said, do not steal, we do not tolerate theft in this environment, regardless of who you are, and you steal and you get fired, there's no way for you to be in your feelings about that, because you knew exactly what the rules were, you knew exactly what the expectations were, and you know that you have, I don't know, what's the right word? You have broken the rules and you've broken the agreement. So I think clarity is essential and is key to avoid conflict, because it takes the emotions away from it once you level set expectations, because then you know this is what needs to be done, and if this isn't done, then you have basically rights to take action.
Yeah, I mean, because even I think about even in the corporate world, like when I still had a corporate job, one of the things that a mentor told me that really helped me, I think this allowed me to move more faster in my career upward than I could have ever imagined, where he said, a lot of times the person that you report to doesn't know how to fully evaluate your performance. So it ends up being very subjective. People get to a point where they're just like, well, I felt like I've been passed over. And they were like, it's your manager's job to kind of lay out what the clear expectation are. But if you're in a situation where your manager doesn't, then take the initiative to say, hey, you know what? What I started doing is when I went into jobs that it wasn't as clear, I went into the manager and said, hey, here are the things that I'm doing. Here's where I've made progress on. Here's what's left. Here's what I need your help on. And it's almost like I gave my manager, hey, here's a scorecard that you can use to grade me. And I've already been working on the stuff. So I got to pick the things that I was already doing. So then when they looked at the scorecard, especially when it was time to review my performance, they would just go back to the scorecard like, hey, Terrell made it easy for me to evaluate him. Like, where's the scorecard? These are the areas where he excelled at. He did well. Like, okay, yeah, he's a stellar employee. I mean, which I was. But, I mean, it was one of those things where like I said, I didn't just like, I guess put up a bunch of crap and just say, hey, all these things that were unrelated to the job. I made sure that, hey, what I was doing was relevant to important things to the job. But like I said, I laid out my own scorecard. So the expectation was clear.
Yep.
And then in times where, let's say, I was falling behind or I was late on something and we had to have a tough conversation, like the conversation wasn't that tough because they were like, hey, I know you wanted this promotion. Hey, this was one of the areas where I think you need some area for improvement.
Right.
And then I can tell from my manager, it was uncomfortable for them to say that. And I was like, you know what? You're absolutely right. Because you and I talked about that. We laid that out. That's clear. Hey, thank you for bringing that back up. That's clear. Here's what I'm going to do to improve in that.
Yeah.
I went back, improved in it 3 months later, promotion with a raise, everything, because the expectations were clear.
Exactly.
And the standard, because I think when you have clear expectations and when you're performing to those expectations, it becomes so much easier to get through conflict and resolving it.
Absolutely. No, that's a really, really good point. I think for me, the whole theme of this whole episode has been the importance of clarity and setting expectations. That's for me, that's the number one way to avoid conflict. Yeah. Now, if the person is still tripping, which was to conclude what the point that you made is, you may get to the point where the expectations that were set, the other person isn't willing to abide by them and the other person isn't willing to fulfill them. Then at that point, it's probably best in your best interest to end the relationship. At that point, that business relationship, that business transaction, it's probably not best for you to continue, because if you've set expectations, and especially if it's expectations that both parties agree to initially, and now the person's deviating from them, then yeah, it probably is time for you to discontinue that relationship.
And if it gets too tense and you need a lawyer, let me know. I know a lot of them.
But yeah, thank you guys for tuning into another episode. Until next time.
If you'd like to see more of the Business Talk Library, be sure to watch us every week on Tuesday nights at 6 p.m.